Buried beneath the sands, her heart had stopped. Until the human brought her back to life. The sand was in her lungs. That was the first thing Corporal Dale Owens registered when the ceiling came down. Not the explosion, not the screaming radio, not the wall of orange dust that swallowed the convoy whole. Just the sound of the Velthari woman beside him, inhaling a mouthful of desert and going completely, terrifyingly silent. The sandstorm had arrived without the usual 15-minute warning the outpost meteorologists always promised. It arrived like a fist. 1 second, Dale was escorting Ambassador Lyra Vell through the ruins of Cassian Station on the edge of the Keth Badlands. And the next second, the ancient stone archway above them decided 400 years was long enough to stay standing. Dale hit the ground hard. His left arm screamed. He ignored it. Lyra was not moving. She lay on her side 3 feet away, half buried under a collapsed sandstone block the size of a refrigerator. Her breathing apparatus, the small silver disc all Velthari wore when operating in high particulate environments, had cracked clean down the middle on impact. Useless. Her 6-fingered hands were open, palms up, the way hands go when the body has stopped arguing with gravity. Dale crawled to her. The storm was a wall of brown noise in every direction. His comm crackled once and died. The rest of the escort team, 2 Velthari guards and Sergeant Priya Nolan, had been 20 meters ahead when the archway fell. They might as well have been on another planet. He checked Lyra's pulse the way he'd been trained. 2 fingers against the side of the neck, tipas where the Velthari secondary artery ran close to the surface. 30 seconds of pressure. Listening with his fingertips. Nothing. Not slow. Not faint. Nothing. Dale sat back on his heels and looked at her face. He had worked alongside Velthari for 2 years at this point. Long enough to know their biology ran cold. Core temperature 12 degrees below human baseline. Resting heart rate so slow, a human doctor would call it a flat line on a good day. Long enough to know that nothing for a Velthari was not the same as nothing for a human. But this felt like nothing. Her skin, typically a pale silver blue, had gone the color of ash. The bioluminescent nodes along her jaw, which the Velthari used the way humans used facial expressions, were completely dark, even when she slept. Those nodes pulsed faintly, and Dale had noticed that the first week. Little stars going on and off along her jawline while she reviewed mission reports. They were off now. All of them. The sandstone block on her lower body wasn't crushing her. Dale could see the gap, a few inches of air between stone and ground. But the impact had been enough. Something inside had stopped. He had 4 minutes of clean air in his filter mask. Maybe 5. He did not spend a single second of it deciding. Dale pressed both hands flat against Lyra's chest. Found the sternum. The Velthari equivalent was slightly higher and narrower than a human's. But the principle was the same. It always came back to the same principle. And he began. 30 compressions. Tilt the head. 2 breaths into a species whose respiratory system he had studied for exactly 1 afternoon during a cultural integration briefing that he had not paid nearly enough attention to. The sand kept coming. He kept going. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. He counted out loud because counting out loud was the only thing keeping the part of his brain that wanted to panic fully occupied. 29, 30. Breathe. 1, 2. The filter mask reduced his airflow by half when he pulled it aside to give the breaths. His lungs started burning somewhere around the 3rd cycle. He kept going. The bioluminescent nodes did not light up. Her chest rose and fell only when he made it rise and fall. Somewhere far behind him, through the howling brown nothing, he heard Priya calling his name. He did not stop to answer. Now Priya would either find him or she wouldn't. Lyra's heart would either start or it wouldn't. He was going to make absolutely sure it was the second option that lost. On the 7th cycle, something changed. He felt it before he saw it. A faint resistance under his palms, like the chest was beginning to push back, like the body had remembered an argument it hadn't finished making. Dale froze for half a second, terrified he'd imagined it. And then he saw the node at the left corner of Lyra's jaw flicker. Once, dim, the color of a dying firefly. Gone. He pressed his fingers to her neck again. There, slow as a clock with a dying battery, irregular as a bad radio signal. But there, a pulse. Dale sat back, mask back over his face, hands shaking badly enough that he had to press them flat against his thighs to make them stop. The sand was in his hair, his ears, the back of his throat. His left arm had moved from screaming to a low, constant howl that suggested something was fractured. Lyra's chest rose, fell, rose again on its own. The node flickered a second time, then a third. Dale exhaled a breath he had not consciously been holding since the archway came down. And he looked at her face, the ash-colored skin, the dark node slowly waking up, the 6-fingered hands still open in the sand. And he said the only thing that came to him. Don't you dare. The storm screamed around them. Her node pulsed. Then Priya's voice was right beside him, and her hand was on his shoulder, and she was saying his name the way people say names when they're not sure the person they're calling is still all the way there. Dale did not answer. He was watching Lyra breathe. 1, 2, 3. Each breath a small, stubborn argument with a world that had tried very hard to end her. He counted them like compressions. 32, 33, 34. As if losing count would break the spell, as if his attention was the thing keeping the rhythm alive. He was still counting when the emergency crawler from the outpost finally punched through the storm wall, and its headlights found them in the dark. Lyra Vel regained consciousness 14 hours later. Not all at once. That was not how Velthari worked. Dale had been told, by the medical officer, by the cultural attaché, by the Velthari consul who had arrived at the outpost medical bay, looking like a man who had practiced calm as a full-time occupation. That Velthari consciousness returned in layers, like sediment settling after a flood. First the body, then the senses, then the mind, then, last of all, memory. So Dale had sat in the corridor outside the medical bay for 14 hours, and he had not left except once to get his arm scanned. Hairline fracture, radius. The medic had wrapped it and told him to rest. Dale had nodded and gone straight back to the corridor. Priya brought him coffee at hour 4. You know she might not remember any of it, Priya said. She sat beside him with her back against the wall, both boots flat on the floor, the way she always sat when she was being honest and not performing optimism. I know, Dale said. Velthari memory around high trauma events gets, the doc used a word, fragmented. I know that too. Priya looked at him sideways. You're going to sit here anyway. It wasn't a question. Dale drank his coffee. At hour 7, the Velthari consul came out and told Dale that Lyra's vitals were stable and her node patterns were returning to normal. He said it with the careful, precise gratitude of someone who had prepared the words in advance and was now delivering them exactly as rehearsed. His name was Oren Sel, and he was Lyra's commanding officer in the Velthari Diplomatic Corps. Which made the moment that his composure broke, just slightly, just a single fracture line across the careful surface of his expression, more striking than anything he said. We are told, Oren said slowly, that she was clinically absent for nearly 4 minutes. Dale said nothing. We are told the intervention was unconventional. CPR, Dale said. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation. It's standard. Oren looked at him for a long moment. For humans. The physics are the same, Dale said. Heart stops. You compress the chest. You breathe for it. You make it start again. Another long pause. Oren had the kind of face that processed things visibly, each new piece of information moving across his features like weather crossing a flat plain. You performed this on a Velthari, he said. I performed it on Lyra, Dale said. She was the one who was there. Oren blinked. Twice. The Velthari equivalent of being stopped mid-sentence. He left without another word. At hour 9, Dale moved from the corridor to the small waiting area adjacent to the bay. He told himself it was because the bench in the corridor was making his back hurt. He told himself that until he believed it, and then he sat in the waiting area and watched the door, and did not let himself think too carefully about why it mattered so much that she was on the other side of it. He had met Lyra Vel 8 months ago during a routine border liaison at Outpost 14. She had arrived 2 hours late because the Velthari shuttle had experienced navigation interference. She had explained this without apology, which Dale had found irritating until he realized it wasn't arrogance. It was just how she communicated, directly without the social padding humans use to soften information. She had shaken his hand, a gesture she had clearly practiced but not yet made entirely natural, and introduced herself with the Velthari custom of adding one's function to one's name. Lyra Vel, speaker for the Keth Accord negotiations, she had said. Corporal Dale Owens, person who makes sure nobody shoots at you, he had answered. The bioluminescent nodes along her jaw had flickered in rapid, irregular patterns. He had learned later that this was the Velthari equivalent of laughing when you didn't expect to. In the months since, he had escorted her through 6 negotiations, 2 border disputes, and one very tense dinner with a Reth delegation that had nearly become an interstellar incident because someone had served the wrong protein course. She argued with her cultural attaché constantly and in great detail. She read reports in the dark, the nodes along her jaw casting enough pale light to work by. She asked Dale questions about human history, not the grand textbook questions, but strange small ones, like whether it was true that humans had once navigated entirely by looking at stars, and whether he thought that was frightening or beautiful. He had said, both. Same way most things are. She had looked at him for a moment and then gone back to her report. 8 months of proximity. 8 months of small accumulations. 14 hours in a corridor. He was still watching the door when it opened. A Velthari medical attendant looked out, caught Dale's eye, and after a pause that might have been hesitation or might have been protocol, she said, "She is asking for the human." Dale stood. His fractured arm throbbed. He barely noticed. He stepped into the medical bay, and Lyra was propped up against pillows on the reclined bed, her color still pale but no longer ash. The nodes along her jaw lit in a soft, steady rhythm he did not have vocabulary for yet. Her eyes, large, dark, the irises the deep amber of old glass, found him immediately. She said his name. Not Corporal Owens, not the human escort. His name, the way she'd never quite said it before, without the slight formality she applied to most human words. Dale. He pulled the chair to her bedside and sat down. "How do you feel?" he asked. Because it was the right question, and because he had been sitting outside for 14 hours with no better one. Her jaw nodes flickered in the irregular, rapid pattern he knew now. "I remember," she said. "Hands." He waited. "Pressure," she said. "Rhythm," and a voice counting. The nodes steadied. "I thought it was a tide. A Velthari memory." When we are children, the elders tell us the deep ocean has a rhythm. And when we die, and we hear it, I thought I was hearing the tide. Dale looked at his hands. The knuckles were still raw from the stone floor. It was me being terrible at staying calm, he said. Her nodes did the laugh flicker again, but slower this time, softer. Yes, she said. I know that now. She looked at him the way she looked at the mission reports, the same quality of attention, the kind that did not leave things out. You stayed. You were breathing, he said. I wanted to make sure it kept happening. The medical bay was quiet around them. Somewhere outside, the storm had died. The Keth Badlands were probably glittering now, the way they always did after a sandstorm, every grain of quartz catching the double sunset light. Lyra reached out and placed her 6-fingered hand over his. She did not say anything. The nodes along her jaw were doing something he had never seen before. A long, slow, warm pulse, moving from chin to ear and back like a tide coming in. He was going to have to ask someone what it meant. Later. Right now he sat very still. Because some things, he had learned, you kept breathing through. 1, 2, 3. The debrief happened 3 days later, in the outpost's main conference room with its one window that faced east toward the Badlands. Dale sat across from Colonel Vera Hutchins, the outpost commander, and Lieutenant Fen Aris, the Velthari military liaison, and one very tired-looking man from the Galactic Accord Oversight Office named Paul Garner, who had flown in specifically to document what had happened under the archway. They had data. They had the crawler team's footage, partial and sand-blurred. And they had the medical report from the bay. They had Oren Cell's formal statement, which Dale had been told was unusually detailed for Velthari diplomatic documentation. What they did not have, Paul Garner explained while clicking through his files, was a framework. The Velthari medical codes, he said, do not recognize cross-species resuscitation as a legitimate intervention. There is no protocol for it. There is no precedent for it. Dale looked at the one window and the edge of the Badlands visible through it. There's one now, he said. Paul Garner looked up. She's alive, Dale said. That's the precedent. Vera Hutchins pressed her lips together in the way she did when she was suppressing a reaction she hadn't decided the shape of yet. Fen Aris, the Velthari liaison, he was watching Dale with the same careful attention Lyra used when she was deciding whether something was worth cataloging. Corporal Owens, Paul said, I want to be clear. This is not disciplinary. The outcome is not in question. What the Oversight Office needs to determine is whether the intervention created any biological risk to the ambassador that we should document for future reference. And whether, did it? Dale asked. Paul stopped. The intervention. Did it create biological risk? Paul glanced at his file. The medical assessment indicates no long-term. Then document that, Dale said. And document that the standard response to a stopped heart is to restart it, by whatever means available. That's the precedent. You don't need a framework for it. It's just what you do. The room was quiet. Outside, a dust crawler moved slowly across the edge of the Badlands, its treads leaving clean lines in the settled sand. Vera cleared her throat. I think what Corporal Owens is saying, she offered carefully, is that the situation was assessed and an action was taken with the information available, and the outcome supports the decision. That is exactly what I'm saying, Dale agreed. Fen Aris leaned forward slightly. Ambassador Vel, he said, has submitted a formal commendation to the Keth Accord Liaison Office, in her own name. This is... He paused, choosing the word with visible care. Not a common occurrence. Dale looked at the window again. The Badlands were a flat amber line under a white sky. He thought about a hand over his. 6 fingers, cool and steady. "She's a thorough person," he said. "She documents things." The debrief ended 40 minutes later without resolution on the framework question, which Paul Garner noted would need to be revisited in subsequent sessions. Dale shook hands with the ones who offered hands, nodded to the rest, and walked out into the corridor. Lyra was standing at the end of it. She was in her full diplomatic attire, the deep charcoal and silver of the Accord Corps, and her posture had returned to its usual precise straightness, the kind that Dale had once mistaken for coldness before he learned to read the nodes. They were doing the slow, warm pulse now, the one he still did not have a name for. He walked toward her. She did not move to meet him halfway, because she was Velthari, and the Velthari did not signal want through closing distance. And she stood where she was and watched him come to her, and when he stopped in front of her, she said without preamble, "The next negotiation at Keth Station begins in 11 days. "I know," Dale said. "I'm on the escort roster." "I requested you specifically," she said. Orin objected. I overruled him. Dale raised an eyebrow. "He believes," Lyra continued, her nodes flickering once in the rapid pattern, "that you are," his word was reckless. "That's fair," Dale said. "I told him reckless was a category error," she said. "That what he observed was a different thing entirely." "What did you call it?" She looked at him with the old glass amber eyes, the nodes doing their slow tide. "Committed," she said. The word I used was committed. Dale stood in the corridor of a dusty outpost at the edge of the Keth Badlands, with a hairline fracture in his forearm and sand still working its way out of his hair 3 days later. And he thought about a woman he had counted breaths for in the dark. And he thought about tides. And he thought about how the Velthari did not signal want through closing distance. He thought about all the ways you could stay. 11 days, he said. 11 days, she agreed. She turned and walked down the corridor, nodes glowing steady and warm, and Dale watched her go, and he did not let himself think too carefully about the fact that he was already counting. 1, 2, 3. 11 days was not enough time. It never was with Keth Station negotiations. Dale had learned this the hard way on the first escort. The Keth delegation operated on a system of conversational layers, where nothing said in the first 3 sessions meant what it appeared to mean, and the actual negotiating only started when both parties had established what the Velthari called Veloran, a word that translated roughly to shared risk, but carried connotations closer to mutual exposure. You couldn't fake it. The Keth could tell, apparently, and if they detected performance instead of genuine investment, the entire process collapsed. Lyra had explained this to Dale on the crawler ride to the station 6 months ago, during the first negotiation he had escorted. They read sincerity in motion, she had said. Not in language. Language is too easy to shape. They watch how you move when you think no one is evaluating you. Dale had thought about that for a long moment. So the whole thing is a test. Everything, Lyra had said, is a test, and most people simply do not acknowledge it. He had thought about that too. The Keth station was built into the side of a cliff face above the Badlands, a structure that the Keth had designed with their characteristic approach to architecture, which was to say, everything was either load-bearing or decorative, and the Keth considered it embarrassing to make load-bearing things that were also decorative. So every beautiful piece of Keth structure was deliberately non-functional, and everything functional was aggressively plain. It looked like two completely different buildings had been pressed against each other and told to cooperate. Dale liked it. He and Priya arrived a day before the Velthari delegation, which was standard practice. Sweep the route, establish the perimeter, coordinate with the Keth security detail. The Keth security detail consisted of 4 individuals, named in sounds Dale could not replicate with his mouth. So he called them North, South, East, and West in his own notes, and they called him the small warm one in theirs, which Lyra had told him with her flickering nodes when she read the exchange report. He had chosen not to examine how he felt about that. The delegation arrived on the morning of the second day. Oren Sel first, with his 2 aides, carrying the kind of controlled energy that indicated he had not slept enough and had decided to compensate through posture. Then the junior diplomats. Then Lyra. She came down the ramp of the shuttle last, the way she always did. Not from ceremony, she had told him once, but because the Velthari tradition was that the senior member of a party ensured all others were safely placed before entering an unknown environment. She did it without drawing attention to it. She just always came last. Dale was standing at the base of the ramp. She stopped 2 steps above him, which put their eyes at the same level, and she looked at him the way she had in the corridor, with the full quality of her attention, nothing held back. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. "Perimeter checks," he said. "The station's outer west section has a structural concern I wanted to physically verify." Her nodes flickered once. "Is it a concern, or is it a wall waiting to come down?" The precision of it landed between them like a stone dropping into still water. "It's stable," Dale said, when I made sure. She came down the last 2 steps and stood level with him. Her nodes were doing the slow warm tide again. He had looked it up finally, in the Velthari Cultural Archive the outpost kept on its secure server. 12 pages of node expression documentation, compiled by a xenoanthropologist named Dr. Carol Webb, who had spent 4 years embedded with the Velthari academic community. The long, slow tide pulse, Dr. Webb had written, was an expression the Velthari called Velshen. There was no single human equivalent. It appeared in contexts of deep recognition. When a Velthari encountered something they had not expected to matter to them, and found that it did. Dale had read that 3 times. He had not told Lyra he had read it. "The negotiations begin in 2 hours, she said. I know the schedule. Oren wants to meet beforehand. He has concerns about the 3rd session framework. He always has concerns. His concerns, she said, are occasionally correct. The flicker. Occasionally. They walked into the station together. Not side by side in the way humans defaulted to when they wanted to signal connection, but in the Velthari formation, the protected party ahead, the escort 1 step behind, and to the right. Standard. Professional. The Keth security detail watched them pass with the kind of focused attention Dale now recognized as approval. The negotiations were brutal, not in the obvious way. There was no shouting, no dramatic collapse. They were brutal in the way of precision instruments used for a long time, a fine, grinding pressure that wore through everything soft. The Keth delegation wanted revised transit access through the outer Vel corridor, which they argued was historically theirs and had been allocated incorrectly in the original accord. The Velthari delegation held that the allocation was both legally and ethically sound, and would not revisit it without a full panel review. The Keth countered that a full panel review was a delay tactic. Lyra countered that delay was preferable to error. Dale sat against the wall and watched. He had learned to read Lyra's negotiations the way he had learned to read her nodes, not by decoding the language, which moved too fast and too layered for him to follow in real time, but by watching the physical signals underneath. When she was under pressure, she became more still. When she was certain, her left hand rested flat on the table. Or when she was genuinely uncertain, which happened rarely but happened, she looked slightly to the right of whoever she was addressing, as if consulting something in the middle distance. At the end of the third session on day 2, she looked slightly to the right. Dale was waiting with water and the small protein bars she preferred, a Velthari brand that smelled to him faintly like pencil shavings. When she came out of the chamber, she sat. She ate one protein bar in its entirety before she spoke. "They know something we don't," she said, "about the corridor." "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet." She looked at the protein bar in her hand, with the expression he associated with her working through a problem. "But they are not arguing for transit access because they want transit access." "Oh, there is another layer." Dale leaned against the wall beside her. "What do you need?" She looked at him. The nodes were the assessment pattern, quick, precise, cataloging. "I need to speak to their lead scientist," she said, "not through channels, informally, off schedule." "That's not in the protocol." "No," she agreed. "It is not." Dale looked at the ceiling. "I know which one is their lead scientist. I've been running the perimeter with their security detail. North, the one I've been paired with most. She works directly with him." Lyra turned her head slightly. "If you give me an hour," he said, "I can probably arrange something that doesn't technically break protocol because it's technically not an official meeting." "That is," Lyra said carefully, "a very thin distinction." "I've been told I'm reckless," he said. The nodes did the laugh flicker, long and warm. "1 hour," she said. He gave her 50 minutes. The lead scientist's name was rendered in human transliteration as Keth Vas Oren, and he agreed to an informal exchange because North had apparently described Dale to him as the small warm one who checks walls before they fall. And this had, for reasons Dale did not fully understand, generated enormous goodwill. They sat in a room off the main corridor, Dale, Lyra, and Keth Vas Oren, without aids, without record, without framework. And Keth Vas Oren told them what they had found. 3 months ago, deep scan surveys in the outer Vel corridor had located something under the sand. Something large. Something that matched no known geological formation and no catalogued structure from any of the 6 species with historical presence in the sector. Something that had been there, the dating suggested, for longer than any of those 6 species had existed. Lyra's nodes went very still. Dale felt the back of his neck do the thing it did when a situation changed shape without announcing it. Keth Vas Oren spread his hands, a gesture Dale recognized as the Keth equivalent of, "We are past the point of careful words." "We did not come to this table for transit," he said. "We came because whatever is down there, it should not be excavated by one species alone." The room held the weight of that. Outside, the Badlands stretched flat and amber and ancient to every horizon. Dale thought about walls that looked like stone and turned out to be something else entirely. He looked at Lyra. Her nodes were doing the tide. The excavation team was assembled in 6 days, which was, by any measurable standard, a logistical miracle. Or, as Priya put it when she arrived with the human technical unit, evidence that everyone involved was operating on the specific kind of sustained focus that only came from being too scared to slow down. 3 Keth geologists, 2 Velthari structural analysts, 1 very unhappy Paul Garner from the Oversight Office, who had not anticipated his framework questions being superseded by something this large this fast. And Dale, who had been officially designated Site Security Coordinator, a title he suspected Lyra had specifically designed because it gave him authority to be everywhere. They found the outer edge of the structure on day 2. It was not geological. That had been confirmed within the first hour of ground-penetrating survey. But seeing the confirmation in the readout and standing at the edge of the excavation pit, staring at a surface that was absolutely, undeniably manufactured, that was different. The material was something none of the scanning equipment could fully categorize. Not metal, as any of the 3 represented species understood metal. Not stone. The surface had a quality that made it look almost soft at certain angles, like it was lit from inside. Though, when you held a light directly against it, the reflection was perfectly flat. Dale crouched at the edge and looked at it. "Stop thinking about touching it," Priya said from behind him. "I wasn't thinking about touching it." "You had the face." "I don't have a face." "Dale, you absolutely have a face." The Velthari analyst nearest to them, a young woman named Ves Oran, no relation to Oran Cell, she had clarified this firmly upon introduction, was running a scanner slowly across the exposed surface. Her nodes were cycling through rapid, overlapping patterns Dale had never seen before, which he was choosing to interpret as scientific excitement rather than alarm. The material absorbs approximately 40% of electromagnetic input, Ves said without looking up. "Which is, I don't have a category for that. Materials either reflect or they don't." "It keeps some," Dale said. Ves looked at him. "It takes in 40% and holds it," he said, "even when it doesn't release it." Ves stared at him for a moment, and then looked back at her scanner with the expression of someone filing something away. Lyra arrived at the pit's edge 20 minutes later, having spent the morning in a comms session with the Kethvel Joint Scientific Board, convincing them that yes, this required expedited clearance, and no, they could not wait for the standard 18-month review process, and yes, she understood the protocol existed for reasons, and no, the reasons did not currently outweigh what they were looking at. She stood beside Dale at the edge. "The board approved accelerated access," she said. "I heard you from across the camp," he said. "The part where you said you understood the protocol, but..." I did not raise my voice. "You had a voice." Her nodes did the flicker, and then they steadied into something more serious. "The Keth geologist found a seam on the north face," she said quietly. "A line that might be a join, or a door." Dale looked at the north face of the structure, visible now as the excavation team had cleared another meter of sand from that side. There was a line there. Straight, precise, the kind of line that sand and time did not make. "We go in tomorrow," he said. It was not a question. "If the structural assessment clears it," Lyra said. "Ves thinks it will." He looked at the structure, then at her. The nodes were doing the tide again, but underneath it there was something else, something quicker, with an edge in it. He did not have a name for that one yet. "Are you afraid?" he asked. He would not have asked 6 months ago. He would have kept the professional distance and the escort and diplomat separation. She looked at the structure for a long moment. "No," she said. "I am..." The Velthari word is Velatha. It does not translate directly. "Try." She was quiet for a moment. "Standing at the edge of something enormous and choosing to step forward anyway," she said. "Not because you're not afraid, but because the not stepping forward is worse." Dale looked at the line in the north face, the precise, impossible line. "Yeah," he said. "I know that word." Her hand found his in the dark beside the pit. not grasping, just present, the way she'd placed it over his in the medical bay. 6 fingers and a steady warmth. The structure sat in the excavated sand below them, absorbing light and giving none of it back. Tomorrow, it would give up its door. Dale held on, and he was not afraid. He was Velatha, reached all the way down. The team entered at dawn, when the light hit flat and the shadows were long enough to see by without burning out the scanners. Dale went first, which Orincel objected to, and Lyra overruled without discussion. The door, if that was what it was, had responded to the Velthari scanner frequency during the overnight test, had shifted a fraction of a centimeter, enough to confirm it was a mechanism and not a seam. Inside, the structure was larger than the surface suggested. Much larger. The material of the walls absorbed the team's helmet lights and gave back a faint, ambient glow. Not enough to see detail, but enough to feel that the space was aware of being entered. Dale registered this as a sensation before he registered it as a fact. At the center of the structure was a chamber. In the chamber was a platform, and on the platform was something that took several long seconds for Dale's mind to resolve into a coherent image. Because his mind kept applying known categories, and the known categories kept not fitting. It looked, most closely, like a person. Velthari, in general form, 6-fingered hands, the elongated jaw, the nodes. But larger. The proportions slightly wrong in the way that suggested this was not a Velthari, but something from which Velthari had come, or something the Velthari had come from, or some third relationship that no existing language had a word for. The nodes were dark. The body was still. Kethvas Orin made a sound that Dale had learned was the Keth equivalent of involuntary prayer. Vess was already scanning. Her readouts cycled through frequencies until she stopped on one and went completely silent for several seconds. "There is a signal," she said. It's not nothing. There is something." Lyra was at Dale's shoulder. Her nodes had gone into the pattern he associated with her deepest attention, the pattern she used when she was reading something that required all of her. "A signal," she said. "Biological?" "I don't have a category for it," Vess said, which was the second time in 2 days she had said those words. Dale looked at the figure on the platform, at the hands, at the dark nodes. He thought about a corridor and a heartbeat and 4 minutes of nothing. He thought about the physics being the same. It always came back to the same principle. He looked at Lyra. She looked at him. The team stood in the light-absorbing dark of a structure older than their civilization. And nobody moved. And the signal on Vess's scanner pulsed once, and very faintly, like a firefly at the end of summer. Like a tide, like something that had been waiting, in the dark, in the sand, for someone to show up and refuse to stop counting. Dale took a step forward. Priya said, "Dale." "I know," he said. He kept walking. Behind him, he heard Lyra's footsteps. 1 step, 2. Steady and certain, Velatha all the way. They reached the platform together. The signal pulsed again. Dale placed his hands flat against the chest of the figure. Not a human chest, not quite a Velthari chest, something older and in between. And he found the principle, the same principle, the one that never changed regardless of what form a body took. He looked at Lyra. She placed her hands over his. 6 fingers, human hands, together. And they began. 1, 2, 3. In the dark below the sand, when in the oldest room anyone had ever stood in, with light absorbed into walls that kept everything they were given, something stirred. Something old enough to have no name for itself opened its eyes. And the first thing it saw was 2 small beings with their hands pressed to its chest, counting in the dark, refusing, with everything they had, to stop.